The resignation letter was only 4 sentences long, no explanation, no apology, no reason given beyond the standard phrase to pursue other opportunities that everyone in Westminster knew meant the opposite of what it said. It landed on Keir Starmer's desk at 6:47 on a Friday evening. His chief of staff read it first, then walked into Starmer's office, closed the door behind him and placed it on the desk without a word. Starmer read it once, then looked up. When did this come in? 20 minutes ago. Has it leaked? A pause that lasted just slightly too long. Not yet. Starmer stood up slowly, moved to the window and looked out at the street below, the cars, the pedestrians, the perfectly ordinary Friday evening that was about to become something else entirely. Because the resignation wasn't the problem. The resignation was the signal. It meant someone had decided the proximity was too dangerous, that staying close to what was coming would cost more than leaving. And when people in Westminster start calculating that kind of cost, it means the thing that's coming is very large indeed. The thing that was coming had a name, Peter Mandelson. It had started, as these things always do, with a document nobody was supposed to find. 6 weeks earlier, a researcher working for an American congressional subcommittee had been cross-referencing flight logs, the now infamous records from Jeffrey Epstein's private aircraft, against a database of diplomatic travel records. Routine work, tedious work, the kind of work that produces nothing for months and then suddenly produces everything at once. She found a name she recognized, not from the flight logs themselves, from a separate set of documents, internal correspondence recovered from Epstein's Manhattan townhouse during the FBI's initial search in 2019. Documents that had been processed, catalogued, and then quietly placed in a restricted access file while investigators focused on more immediately actionable material. The name in those documents was Peter Mandelson, not a flight log entry, not a photograph, a reference in an email exchange between 2 of Epstein's associates to a meeting, a dinner, a private gathering at a location in New York. The date was 2011. The context was described obliquely as a network introduction. The researcher flagged it. Her supervisor reviewed it. 2 days later, it was on the desk of a senior subcommittee member who understood immediately what it meant, not just for Epstein's legacy, but for a sitting British ambassador to the United States, an ambassador appointed personally by Keir Starmer, an ambassador who at that precise moment was scheduled to host a state dinner at the British Embassy in Washington in 11 days. The subcommittee member sat with the document for a long time. She understood the weight of what she was holding. This wasn't a peripheral name, a socialite, a businessman, a figure from the margins of power. This was Britain's most senior diplomat in America, a man with decades of access to the highest levels of European and transatlantic politics, a man whose appointment had been personally championed by a sitting Prime Minister. She picked up the phone and called the subcommittee chair. "We have a problem," she said, "and it has a British passport." The British government received informal notification through diplomatic channels on a Tuesday afternoon. The message was careful, couched in the language of ongoing congressional processes and routine document review, but its meaning was unmistakable. The subcommittee had material. The material involved Mandelson, and while no formal action was imminent, the subcommittee could not guarantee that the documents would remain restricted indefinitely. The notification went to the Foreign Office first. From there, it moved within the hour to Downing Street. Starmer was in a budget meeting when his chief of staff appeared in the doorway. The meeting stopped. Everyone else was asked to leave. What happened in the next 40 minutes in that room with the door closed has not been officially recorded, but 3 people who were present have since described, separately and without coordination, the same essential sequence of events. Starmer read the notification. He read it again. We asked one question: how solid is this? His chief of staff said, solid enough that they're telling us, and then Starmer said nothing for a very long time. The problem was not simply the association. In politics, associations can be managed, context provided, distances established, timelines clarified. The problem was the timing and the role. Mandelson was not a backbencher, he was not a party donor or a peripheral figure who could be quietly distanced with a carefully worded statement. He was Britain's ambassador to the United States, the most visible, most consequential diplomatic appointment of Starmer's government. He had been placed in Washington specifically because of his relationships, his access, his decades of experience navigating the intersection of politics, money and power. Those same qualities that made him valuable were now making him dangerous, because the questions that would follow, and they would follow, that much was certain, would not stop at Mandelson. They would move, as these questions always move, upward. Who knew? When did they know? What did they do with what they knew? And underneath all of those questions, the one that would do the most damage: why did Starmer choose this man? The answer, of course, was complicated. Mandelson had been chosen because he was brilliant, experienced, and had the kind of transatlantic relationships that no other candidate could match. He had been chosen because the moment demanded someone of his caliber. He had been chosen, some in Westminster whispered, because keeping Mandelson close was safer than leaving him outside the tent. None of those answers would survive contact with a headline. In Washington, Mandelson received the news in his private office at the British Embassy. His assistant brought it to him on a single printed sheet, a summary of the congressional notification prepared by the Foreign Office legal team. He read it without changing expression. He placed the sheet face down on his desk. He asked his assistant to leave and close the door. Then he sat alone for 20 minutes, not making calls, not drafting responses, just sitting with the particular stillness of a man who has survived more political crises than most people have had careers, and who knows from long experience the difference between a storm that passes and one that does not. This one, he understood immediately, was different. Not because of what the document said. He knew what it said. He remembered the dinner. He remembered the introduction. He remembered thinking at the time that the gathering was exactly what it appeared to be, a routine evening in the world of international finance and politics, the kind that happened 3 times a week in certain circles in New York and London and Geneva. He had not known then what he knew now about the man who hosted it, or at least that was what he would say. The question was whether anyone would believe it. He picked up the phone and called his lawyer. The advisor who resigned had been with Starmer for 6 years. She had joined his team when he was Director of Public Prosecutions, back when the idea of him becoming Prime Minister was still a distant theoretical possibility. She had worked through the leadership campaign, the opposition years, the election. She knew where everybody was buried metaphorically, and she had protected him consistently and effectively from the consequences of his own occasional misjudgments. She was, in the assessment of everyone who worked alongside her, the most important person in the building who didn't have a title. When she resigned on that Friday evening, she gave no reason, but she had, 2 days earlier, asked a single question in a private meeting about the Mandelson situation. The question was direct, as her questions always were. Does he stay or does he go? The room had not answered clearly. There had been discussion of process, of waiting for more information, of managing the narrative carefully. There had been talk of Mandelson's denials already being drafted and of the government's legal options if the documents were published without proper context. She had listened to all of it. Then she had asked a question again. Does he stay or does he go? Still no clear answer. She had nodded slowly, gathered her papers, and left the room. She understood what the non-answer meant. It meant they were going to try to hold the line, to manage, delay, contextualize, survive. It was the calculation that political teams always made when the alternative was too painful to accept. She had seen it before. She knew how it ended. 2 days later, the letter was on Starmer's desk. The leak came on a Saturday morning, not from the congressional subcommittee, not officially. But someone, somewhere in the chain of people who had seen the documents, had decided the public interest outweighed the protocol. A single page, photographed on a phone, posted to a private Telegram channel at 6:14 a.m. By 7 a.m. it was on Twitter. By 8 a.m. it was on the front page of 3 newspaper websites. By 9 a.m. every television news program in Britain was running it. The page was not the most damaging document in the file. It was a single email, 2 lines, from one of Epstein's associates to another referencing PM's attendance at Thursday dinner and asking whether the British contact had been properly introduced to the principal guests. 2 lines, vague enough to be deniable, specific enough to be devastating. Because in the context of everything else the public already knew about Epstein, his crimes, his network, his method of collecting powerful people, even a vague reference carried enormous weight. And the phrase "the British contact unspecified," unnamed in the document itself, had been identified in the congressional summary as referring to Mandelson, Britain's current ambassador to the United States. Mandelson issued his statement on Saturday morning. It was 4 paragraphs, drafted with considerable legal input. It acknowledged that he had attended various social and professional gatherings during his time in international finance and public life. It stated that he had no knowledge of and no involvement in any criminal activity connected to Jeffrey Epstein. It described the congressional document as taken entirely out of context and said he was fully cooperating with any legitimate inquiry. It did not deny the meeting. It did not deny the dinner. It described them as unremarkable professional encounters of the kind that occur routinely in international circles. The statement was released at 8 a.m. By 9 a.m., every political editor in Britain had dissected it. By 10 a.m., the absence of a direct denial was the story. By noon, Nigel Farage was at a microphone. He didn't need notes. He never needed notes for this kind of moment. The Prime Minister, Farage said, standing outside Westminster with the building behind him, appointed Peter Mandelson as Britain's most senior diplomat. He did this knowing Mandelson's history, knowing his associations, knowing the questions that were already circulating in Washington. He paused. And now we have a congressional document. We have a resignation from his closest advisor. We have a statement from Mandelson that doesn't deny a single fact, it just adds adjectives to them. Another pause. Unremarkable professional encounters, that's what he calls it. A dinner with Jeffrey Epstein's network. Unremarkable. He looked directly at the camera. Keir Starmer needs to answer one question today, not tomorrow, today. What did he know about Peter Mandelson's connections before he made that appointment? And when did he know it?
The clip ran on every channel for the rest of the day. Inside Downing Street, they watched it in silence. The communications director spoke first. "We need to get ahead of this before PMQs. PMQs is Wednesday," someone said. "I know when PMQs is. I mean, we need a position that holds until Wednesday. Right now, we don't have one." Starmer was standing at the back of the room, arms crossed, watching the screen. "What's Mandelson saying privately?" he asked. "He's saying he won't resign. He's saying the documents are being weaponized. He's saying if we push him out, it looks like an admission. Is he right?" A long silence. "He might be," his communications director said carefully. "But if he stays and more comes out, more will come out," Starmer said flatly. "There's always more." Nobody disagreed. The room sat with that for a moment. Outside, through the windows of Downing Street, the press had gathered. Cameras, reporters, the quiet, patient machinery of a story that had found its momentum and would not stop now. Starmer looked around the room at the people he trusted most. Half of them looked back at him with the expression he had seen before, the expression that meant "we will support whatever you decide," while also clearly communicating, "We are very glad this decision is yours and not ours." He turned back to the window. "Get me Mandelson on the phone," he said. "Not through the embassy. Direct." His chief of staff nodded and left the room. Starmer stayed at the window. He thought about the 6 years his advisor had given him, the loyalty, the precision, the 1,000 small decisions she had made correctly so that he never had to make them badly. He thought about the question she had asked twice and not received an answer to. Does he stay or does he go? He still didn't have an answer, but Wednesday was coming. Sunday brought 3 more stories. Monday brought a former colleague of Mandelson's, unnamed, speaking to a Sunday broadsheet, who said that the dinner had been discussed internally at the time and that concerns had been raised and dismissed. Tuesday brought a parliamentary motion, signed by 22 MPs, including 6 from Labour's own backbenches, calling for an independent inquiry. 6 Labour MPs, his own party. The motion landed on Starmer's desk on Tuesday afternoon. He read the names carefully. Some surprised him, most did not. He had known, since Saturday morning, that the pressure would come from inside as well as outside. That was always how these things worked. The opposition could shout from across the chamber, but it was his own people, quiet and uncomfortable and unwilling to look him directly in the eye in the corridor, who represented the real danger. By Tuesday evening, the whips were reporting that the number of uncomfortable Labour MPs had grown from 6 to somewhere between 15 and 20. Not enough for a crisis, enough for a problem that would become a crisis if Wednesday went badly. Wednesday came faster than anyone was ready for. The chamber was full before the session even started, an unusual thing, even by the standards of a turbulent week. Word had moved through Westminster with a particular velocity that only genuine scandal generates. Not managed briefings, not coordinated leaks, just the raw, uncomfortable awareness that something real was happening, and that the next hour might determine how it ended. Every seat taken, every camera positioned, the press gallery full for the first time in months. Starmer stood at the dispatch box. His expression was composed. His notes were in front of him. He had prepared for every question, had rehearsed every answer, every deflection, every careful non-commitment that would give nothing away while appearing to give everything. He had not prepared for the question that actually came. It came from his own side, a Labour backbencher, young, relatively new, representing a northern constituency that had returned a Labour MP for the first time in 12 years. She had been quiet all week, had not signed the motion, had not spoken to the press, had given no indication to anyone of what she was about to do. She stood up slowly. The chamber noticed. When a backbencher on the government side stands during PMQs with that particular quality of deliberateness, unhurried, calm, decided the room understands that something is different. She waited for the speaker's nod. Then she spoke. "Can the Prime Minister confirm," she said, her voice steady and clear, "that before appointing Lord Mandelson as ambassador to the United States, he conducted a full review of Lord Mandelson's professional associations and was satisfied that no conflict of interest or reputational risk existed?" The chamber went very quiet. Not the theatrical quiet of opposition point scoring, the genuine quiet of people understanding that something significant had just occurred. A Labour MP, his own benches, asking the question that Farage had been asking from the outside, but asking it from the inside, where it could not be dismissed as political theatre. Starmer looked up from his notes. The cameras turned to him. Every journalist in the press gallery leaned forward simultaneously. Across the chamber, Farage watched without expression. He had been waiting for this. Not this question specifically, but this moment. The moment when the pressure inside the tent became greater than the pressure outside it. He watched Starmer's face. He watched the Prime Minister open his mouth, and then in the officials' box to the side of the chamber, Starmer's Chief of Staff looked down at his phone. A message had arrived from Washington. The subcommittee had voted. The documents were being released, all of them, unredacted. Within the hour, the Chief of Staff looked up across the chamber at Starmer. Their eyes met. Starmer couldn't read the expression clearly from the dispatch box, but he had worked with this man long enough to understand what the look meant without words. Everything just changed. He stood at the dispatch box, in the fullest chamber he had faced since becoming Prime Minister, with the question hanging in the air and the cameras fixed on him and his own backbencher, waiting for an answer. He closed his notes. He looked at the backbencher who had asked the question, at the opposition benches, at the Speaker, at the packed galleries above. He took a breath. Outside Westminster, on the pavements and in the offices and in living rooms across the country, people were about to read documents that had spent years locked in a restricted file in Washington. Inside the chamber, nobody moved, nobody breathed. He opened his mouth, and whatever came next, whoever he protected, whoever he abandoned, whatever calculation he made in that single suspended moment, nothing would be the same on the other side of it. Not for Mandelson, not for the government, not for him. The chamber waited.